morning, guys. Everybody doing okay today? So this week we are going to be talking about the Civil War. Who can tell me something they know about the Civil War? Tommy. Yep, it was against the North and the South, that's right. Anybody else have anything? I know y'all have learned about this some throughout middle school, but I want to see what all you remember from what you've learned. Karen? It did have a lot to do with slavery. Yep, that's one of the big reasons that the Civil War did occur. Anybody else got anything? John? No, the Civil War didn't have anything to do with the Holocaust. The Holocaust was actually sometime later, and that was during World War II. That had to do with Germany. With the Civil War, it was just between the United States themselves. It was the North and the South, so there were no other countries that were involved with the Civil War. But I mean, it's good, you know your wars, that some different things, big things happened with different wars. All right, so I'm going to start by showing you guys a video. And it's going to get dark in here, so I'm going to cut the light off. So everybody make sure you stay awake, because we're going to talk about this afterwards.
The American Civil War will be described by most Americans.
Fell asleep on me. Here we go.
Historians as the most cataclysmic event in the nation's history, and the one that came closest to destroying the Union.
And at the heart was really the issue of slavery. And that issue remained in the background. It was, a constant source of tension between states in which slavery was permitted, indeed became part of the economy, was a way of life, actually. And eventually, of course, it erupted into what became known as the Civil War.
That was the schizophrenia that America had at that point. We were the land of freedom, the land of opportunity, the land of democracy, but about 35% of the people who lived there did so in chains.
It's impossible for a modern person to understand the depth of courage they had. You look at how close they stood, and how long they were prepared to shoot at each other, and how many casualties it took in an hour. It's almost impossible to imagine the courage, the dedication, the discipline that they showed.
Imagine warfare where your ability to load and tamp a musket faster than the guy with the other musket would determine if you lived or died.
I think for me, the things that stand out about the Civil War is literally the idea of brother fighting against brother, cousin fighting against cousin, because the country was literally torn in two.
Those 4 years, more Americans died in battle during those 4 years than all other wars that America has been in combined.
When you have 620,000 dead people in a country that only had 50 million people, you have driven home emotionally the importance of the conflict at a depth that lasted 100 years.
And we must never forget either that many times that number of people were crippled or invalided for life by the war.
Ended up being such a critical time in the United States, and such a devastating time, but devastating because so much was at stake. It would literally change the face of the nation.
If the Southern secession had prevailed, there would have been no end of further secessions. There wouldn't just have been 2 countries instead of 1. The 2 countries would then further have disintegrated.
Fortunately for us, the North, as the underdog, came back and won that war for a variety of reasons, and really changed the landscape and complexity of what it means to be an American.
By the act of winning, the North both validated freedom and validated the industrial model. And so you have an American confidence, an American sense of achievement, an American willingness to go out around the world that is fundamentally different than you would have had 10 years before the war.
we had never been more divided as a country than we were in 1860. It really was like we were two countries masquerading as one.
I think it's very hard to understand the role of America in the world without war and without people all around the world looking and saying, you know, Lincoln was right. You can have government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That was not at all clear in 1860. People were still very skeptical of the American experiment.
The incredibly insane experiment that is American democracy really almost fell apart. And yet, the nation was able to survive it and grow because of it.
So that video is just a little snippet about what the World War, or the Civil War, sorry, John, you got me on World War. What the Civil War entailed. A lot of destruction, a lot of deaths occurred during the Civil War. And actually, during the Civil War, more Americans died during the Civil War than any other war. Part of the reasoning is because the only people fighting in the Civil War were Americans. You know, in other wars, the World War I, World War II, you had different countries fighting. So when people died, you know, you had some Germans dying, you had Americans dying, and others. But with the Civil War, it was strictly Americans. Interestingly enough, though, the majority of deaths were from disease, not from the war itself. The war occurred between 1861 and 1865. It actually started with the Battle of Fort Sumter, and that was almost 158 years ago. That was on April 12th. So in a couple days, that will be 158 years ago. So that's a long time. And it was between the North and the South. So let's just talk a little bit, move this chair. Let's just talk a little bit about the differences between the North and the South in the Civil War. So we're going to do a Venn diagram, and I want you guys to pay attention because you're going to be doing a project on this. It's going to be a compare and contrast assignment, and it will be separate. We will have group projects later, but this project will be separate right now. But pay attention to how we're doing this because you do have the option to do a Venn diagram or PowerPoint, whatever you prefer, in order to do your project. Okay, so this is the North and the South. Can anybody give me any information about the North and the South? About them during the Civil War? Some things maybe the North did that was different than the South, or some things they both did. Jan? Right. It was had to do with slavery. So who knows which opposed slavery and which were for slavery? Yes, John, you're right. The South did. They were for slavery and the North opposed slavery. So that's one thing that we can put. Opposed slavery. And I'm trying to make this big enough to where you can read, but I don't want to make it too big that we're not going to be able to fit enough things inside. And so the South approved slavery. Anybody think of anything else? I know we've not gotten into full discussion about it yet, so we will be learning about this all throughout this week. We're going to be reading more about it, we're going to be discussing more about it, y'all are going to get in the groups to discuss more about it so you can kind of hear what everybody has to think about it as well. One thing that the North was different is that they were based, and I know you're going to realize this once I write it down, they were based on industry, and trade. The South was economy based on agriculture, which makes sense now because they had the slaves who managed the fields a lot of the times. this kind of, we're in a small town, so you would think this to be the case now, but I know this is different now. But for the North was mainly big cities, while the South were small towns. Can anybody kind of venture what the main way of transportation goods were for the North or the South? We'll just put main transportation. Anybody? Hannah? Okay, one of them were railroads, you just don't know which. Okay, well, the railroads and steam engines were part of the North transportation. And for the South, their main transportation were steamboats. Just to fall asleep on us. And part of, with the big cities and the small towns, the North, with them being a big city, they had industries and factories. And the South had plantations. I know a lot of you are familiar with plantations and have probably maybe even seen them, whether it be on field trips that you've taken in the past or even with family trips and farms. So there's some differences between the North and the South, and again, we'll be learning more about that this week. But can anybody think of any similarities between the two? Anything at all? Okay, well, one was opposed to slavery while the other was for slavery, but one thing they had in common is they both treated slaves poorly. Interestingly enough, you would think that the North would treat the slaves better than the South because they were opposed to slavery, but in fact, they actually treated them poorly as well. Anything else? And actually, Tommy, that is one of the things that I was going to put. They were both part of the United States. And we'll try to fit one more similarity in this. This one has to do with the transportation. Anybody? Okay, Bo? You're right. They both had transportation by river. And more specifically, they transported their goods by river. All right, so there's just some similarities and differences between the North and the South. Part of what you're going to be working on in your assignments, the projects that you'll be doing, is you'll need to focus on something with the North and the South. You're going to have to compare and contrast. You can even choose who you think is going to win. Even if you know who actually wins the war, I want you to be able to look at what's going on during the war and based on that, who you think is actually going to win the war. So, but we're also going to be researching certain things about it, certain facts that stand out, certain people, important facts. Some of the top 10 battles, people, terms that have to do with the Civil War, I'm going to write down. So Abraham Lincoln. Can anybody tell me anything about Abraham Lincoln? He was the 16th president. Who said that? You're right, Shannon. He was the 16th president. I'll just put that to the side, even though I won't be doing this for all of these. He did help abolish slavery. Whoever said that. That's right. Now keep these things in mind, because these are things that you can be working on or talking about during your projects themselves. Fort Sumter. Now I know I mentioned that earlier. That is when the Civil War began, with the battle at Fort Sumter. The first battle of Bull Run. Jefferson Davis. Robert E. Lee. Stonewall Jackson. Emancipation. Proclamation. The Battle of Gettysburg. And I'll move out of the way in just a second so you guys can see these and take notes. Take notes, I would recommend. And states' rights. And these are just a few. So these are just a few of the main terms of the Civil War. So keep these in mind whenever you're going to be working on your projects. Right now you have been assigned an article. It's in your Google Classroom right now on News at ELA. I need you to open that up. It should be based on your Lexile level. You have different ones that you can choose. So go ahead and open that up and choose the article that is based on your Lexile about Abraham Lincoln and read through that really quick, and then we will pick up in just a second. If you have any questions, let me know and I'll come around. Okay guys, now that you've read, I want you to break into groups. Not just your friends. If I just see friends pairing up that are just gonna talk, then I'll arrange the groups for you. So break into groups and talk about what you've just read. I want to know y'all's opinions on what you read. Now after you've discussed what you've read, I want you to look at the top 10 that I've written on the board. Out of those, I want your group to pick one of the topics. And once you pick the one, go into Google Classroom. Each of these are listed in Google Classroom. And for each of them, if you click on whichever one that you're interested in, there are resources for that. For example, if you go to the Abraham Lincoln resource, you click on it, and there's going to be websites, there's going to be slideshows, there's going to be some articles that you can read about whichever top 10 that you choose. make sure that you take bulleted notes. So again, if it is Abraham Lincoln, be taking notes, bulleted notes that your group can, if you have to explain it to another group, you need to know it well enough that you can explain it to another group. Because I can pair y'all up in different groups so you can teach the other groups what you learned. After you're finished, we're going to have you, under each term, each group's going to write out their little bulletin notes under each top 10, okay? So make sure you take good notes. Alright guys, now I want you to work on your compare and contrast assignments, and we'll pick up tomorrow with the rest of this. I'm going to start the class by talking more about Fort Sumter. Alright guys. I'm going to read about Fort Sumter, and again, this is when, this is actually what started the Civil War, what happened at Fort Sumter. So pay attention. If I see anybody not paying attention, then you will know about it. Alright. Fort Sumter is an island fortification located in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Originally constructed in 1829 as a coastal garrison, Fort Sumter is most famous for being the site of the first shots of the Civil War. U.S. Major Robert Anderson occupied the unfinished fort in December 1860 following South Carolina's secession from the Union, initiating a standoff with the state's militia forces. When President Abraham Lincoln announced plans to resupply the fort, Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard bombarded Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861. Again, like I said, almost 158 years ago. I did my math right. After a 34-hour exchange of artillery fire, Anderson and 86 soldiers surrendered on the fort on April 13th. Confederate troops then occupied Fort Sumter for nearly 4 years, resisting several bombardments by Union forces before abandoning the garrison prior to William T. Sherman's capture of Charleston in February 1865. After the Civil War, Fort Sumter was restored by the U.S. military and manned during the Spanish-American War, World War I, and World War II. The construction and design of Fort Sumter, it was first built in the wake of